This is The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Alice Lagnado. Today I'd like to invite you to join me in looking back at some of the highlights of our feature stories of 2013. First of all, I'd like to take a look at some science stories. At this time of year, we're all thinking of snow, and there's no shortage of that in Antarctica, where Russian scientists are drilling through to a lake that's been hidden under the ice for up to 15 million years. The men stationed at the Vostok base in East Antarctica are modern-day heroes, working in the most basic conditions to find out more about the climate of the past and of the future. The idea of the heroic adventurer or the explorer pitting themselves against a harsh landscape far from civilization may seem old-fashioned. But on the continent of Antarctica, a group of Russian scientists are doing just that. They're drilling through 2.5 miles of ice to the sub-glacial Lake Vostok, which has been cut off for more than 14 million years. It's the biggest of 300 sub-glacial lakes under Antarctica, covering 15,000 square metres. The lake holds priceless information about the past, information that could illuminate questions we have today about climate change and much more besides. And make no mistake, this is one of the world's harshest climates. 3,500 metres above sea level, the lack of oxygen makes it difficult to breathe. Scientists arriving at Vostok typically feel ill for several days, complaining of headaches and fever. Temperatures are -30 or colder. Living conditions are basic, and the station is cut off from the outside world. If we're talking about 21st century heroes, these Russian scientists fit the bill. So I couldn't resist going to St Petersburg to meet one of them, Dr Alexey Ekaykin. Alexey is a glaciologist based at the Arctic-Antarctic Research Institute on Bering Street. He's been travelling to Antarctica since 1998. I asked him why Lake Vostok is so significant.
I think it's mainly about searching for the new forms of life, because all we know is just life which lives on our planet, and people trying to find the traces of life anywhere else, on Mars, everywhere, but only our terrestrial forms of life are known yet. And Lake Vostok is a kind of analog of extraterrestrial environments which can exist on the planets like Europa. It's a satellite of Jupiter.
The surface of Europa is thought to conceal a liquid ocean underneath its icy surface. But when Alexey talks about new forms of life, he doesn't mean little green men.
Of course, we must first of all to define what it means, new forms of life. But yeah, of course, we are talking about microbes, not about big organisms. Yeah. So it will be something new about the evolution of life, because now we know that everywhere where we have water, we have life. And this is a kind of very strict law, and we don't know any exceptions. And if Lake Vostok does not contain any life, that would be a kind of new discovery as well. But I think that the ability of life to adapt, to evolve, it's really very strong, very huge, and I think there must be something in the Lake Vostok.
Alexey is part of a team of 11 men, another glaciologist, plus 9 drillers, who live and work at the Vostok station, as the Russian research outpost is called, for 2 months each year. It takes them 10 days to get there, but nearly a month to get back. On the return trip, they sail by ship from Antarctica to Cape Town in South Africa, and then by plane back to St Petersburg.
So we go there just for summer season, December and January, the warmest part of the year, of course, but the temperature is -25, -30. We live in just normal houses, which are quite warm inside, and the drilling site, there is the temperature is about +10. As for me, my work is mainly in cold lab, so there is a -15 in the cold lab. Or sometimes I work in ice core storage, it's a -50.
Alexey Ekaykin often works outside, taking samples of snow for analysis in the lab. For instance, one research institute asked him to get samples to test for cosmic dust. Cosmic dust is dust that falls from space. It falls all over the Earth, but in most places is covered with tons of mud. The best place to look for cosmic dust is somewhere very clean, like Antarctica, but even here it's not easy, as the ratio of terrestrial to cosmic particles is 1,000 to 1. To obtain his snow samples, first Alexey has to dig a pit in the snow, normally 3 meters deep, though he once managed to burrow down an incredible 12 meters. He can dig the first 2 meters with a shovel, but then the snow becomes so tightly packed that he needs a saw. The deeper you go, the older the snow is, which means it can tell scientists more about the climate of the past. Alexey spends 2 or 3 hours down a rope ladder in the snow pit collecting samples before he must take a break. Temperatures there can reach -50. He says because the work can be repetitive, it's a good time to think or even sing to yourself. Indoors, Alexey works in a laboratory with the ice core, a cylindrical piece of ice that's been removed by the drillers. He cuts off thin slices to study its properties, such as its gas content. Analysing the ice core allows scientists to study the climate in Antarctica as it was hundreds of thousands of years ago. The ice quite literally gives them a moment of frozen time. It's heavy work carrying the ice core around all day. A metre-long chunk weighs 10 kilograms, and thanks to the lack of oxygen, that feels like 20. In 2012, Alexey and his colleagues penetrated the lake after 2 decades of drilling by the Russian team. This year, they went further.
So at end of February we came back from Antarctica and we spent there 3 months. This time we were re-drilling the lake water. In last season there was a penetration into the lake. The water came into the borehole for 400 meters and it was, during the last year it was frozen in the borehole. And our main task was to re-drill this frozen lake water and take the first samples of lake water.
Why does Alexey say these samples were the first clean ones, if he and his team penetrated the lake for the first time in 2012?
I can say it was the first time. The previous season after the penetration, we also received one sample of water which was frozen on the bottom of the drill. This sample was not very clean because it was mixed with drilling fluid, kerosene and so on. It was not very good for microbiologists, even for us. So we measure isotopic content here in the lab. Of course we can separate kerosene from water because they separate easily. But still it was not very clean.
Alexey and his colleagues are now analysing the samples brought back from Lake Vostok.
The most interesting Lake Vostok, it's about its microbiological content. It's what everybody's speaking about now. Because the lake was isolated from the rest of the Earth for at least 14 million years or so. And the conditions in the lake is quite strange, interesting, because there is a lot of oxygen there, for example. Because we don't know such environments with lots of oxygen. And oxygen is a kind of poison for all the living things, because organics is burned in the oxygen, you know. You cannot breathe pure oxygen, I mean, because you will die very fast. And for microorganisms it's even more dangerous because they will be burnt. If there is any microbes which can live in such environment, it would be really strange because they can adapt to these strange conditions.
Dr Alexey Ekaykin. To understand how other scientists see the Vostok project, I went to the University of Bristol to talk to Professor Martin Siegert. He's one of the scientists leading the British Antarctic mission at another subglacial lake, Lake Ellsworth.
Ice cores have been taken from Vostok Station really since the late 1960s, and we have amazing knowledge as a consequence of those deep ice cores about Earth's past climate. I mean, much of what we know about the last 400,000 years on our planet has come about from the amazing Vostok ice core record.
The Russian mission has brought about great progress in glaciological terms.
The geophysics, glacier geophysics, which have demonstrated not just the fact that the lake is there, and this goes back to the 1960s, or the seismic data, but the actual detail of the lake outline. And the size and shape of the lake cavity is something which is an astounding achievement. So from a glaciological perspective, just the size and shape of the ice sheet, how it flows, how the ice sheet interacts with the lake, is something which has been a huge advance in our knowledge. And a lot of that is from Russian scientists. Some of that's from US scientists as well, a little bit from British, but it's where we are right now. It would not have been possible, actually, without the Russian station being where it is and all the Russian work that's been going on for the last 40 years.
Professor Martin Siegert. The Russian scientists have sometimes been criticised for their methods. Some argue that they are at risk of contaminating the lake. I asked Martin Siegert whether he had concerns about the project.
All I would say is that when we were designing the experiment for Lake Ellsworth, when you have an experiment where you have essentially a blank piece of paper and your mission is to get into a subglacial lake, you can design an experiment however you wish to. The Russian experiment is just slightly different through concept to that, in that there is just an opportunity of accessing the lake because of the deep borehole that was already there.
Getting at those ice cores is not straightforward.
To collect an ice core, what you need to do is you need to drill through the ice. And to drill through the ice, you need an antifreeze for two reasons. Firstly, you don't want the drill bit to freeze up, so you need an antifreeze to keep it lubricated. But also you have to have some liquid in the borehole, else the pressures of the ice will close it up. And if you use water as that liquid, it will freeze. So that's no good. You have to use an antifreeze. And the antifreeze that's commonly used at Vostok is kerosene. What the Russian scientists have an opportunity to do is access the lake using the deep borehole, because there's a hole which has already been built. The difficulty is that it's a hole which is full of kerosene material, and so whatever experiment you design has to have that taken into account. I wouldn't offer criticism, I'd just say there are different approaches to the programme, and it's for Russian scientists to work around the experiment that's been chosen. That's up to them to do it.
Martin Siegert. The Russian scientists say there's no danger of contamination. They say the pressure in the borehole is less than in the lake, so that the kerosene will go upwards rather than down into the lake. The Russian, British and American scientists working in Antarctica are sometimes portrayed as taking part in a competition with echoes of the 1960s space race. But though everyone wants results, the scientists involved told me they enjoy working with each other. Martin Siegert again.
Science is always competitive. We always wanted to be the first to do things. But in subglacial lakes, I think the idea of competition has been put out there in the media a little bit more than it is felt by the scientists.
Ordinary Russians find the Vostok mission inspiring. Some of them have even written a song about it. Alexander Gavrilov is a 29-year-old doctor from Donetsk, a city in Ukraine, who wrote the song for his band, Amusant Antenna. I called Alexander up to ask him why he wrote the song.
I was always fascinated with the Antarctic and everything that's related to it. I love the icy silence of it. And when I found out about Lake Vostok, I was so impressed by it that I couldn't help but write a song about it. I'm fascinated by anything that is unknown. There is so much around that we simply don't notice. In the case of Vostok, it's not just that it's of scientific interest, but there's something very mystical about it. I was really curious about what they were going to find there, because this lake was so isolated from the outside world for a very long time.
I asked Alexander whether he thought the scientists working at the Vostok station were modern-day heroes.
Absolutely. Anyone who doesn't stay at home and tries to learn about the outside world, especially in such difficult conditions, is a hero. Anyone who pushes science forward towards progress is also a hero.
Have the scientists heard his song?
I don't know whether they've heard of it, but they could have come across it on the internet. It would be very nice if they did.
This is The Voice of Russia. I'm Alice Lagnado. Right now, as we enjoy Christmas, Russian scientists are hard at work at the Vostok station. Our winter is summer in Antarctica, which means it's warm enough for planes to fly in and out of the region. This autumn I went to St Petersburg to talk to Professor Nikolai Vasiliev, who's been leading the drilling operations at Vostok station since the 1970s, before he set off for Antarctica. This is The Voice of Russia. I'm Alice Lagnado with a report from St Petersburg. Nikolai Vasiliev is a man who is prepared to wait. As head of the drilling team at Russia's research outpost in East Antarctica, he spent over 30 years dreaming up ingenious ways to penetrate Lake Vostok a gigantic pool of water that's been cut off from the rest of the world for millions of years and which may contain new forms of life. Professor Vasiliev has had to design a drill that would drive through 2.5 miles of ice, something so difficult it's been compared to space exploration. He's gone back to the drawing board year after year, refusing to entertain thoughts of failure, designing and redesigning in an audacious challenge to the natural world. On February the 6th, 2012, his perseverance paid off. With just hours to go before the Russian team had to abandon their research station before the onset of the severe Antarctic winter, and half a century after the Russians first discovered Lake Vostok, they finally penetrated this hidden body of water. 1 year later, in February 2013, the team obtained samples of lake water and brought them back to St Petersburg for analysis. But there was a slight problem. Due to unexpected amounts of pressure in the borehole, what the Russian team dubbed the piston effect, the samples had been slightly contaminated. They contained kerosene, which is used to keep the borehole from closing up due to the powerful pressure of the ice around it. Scientists working on the lake water samples right now in St Petersburg say it's too early to say anything definitive about what's in the water. But in any case, Vasiliev's mission remains the same. He must try to drill through to the lake once again. In order to meet Professor Vasiliev, I went to St Petersburg, to Russia's National Mineral Resources University, commonly known as the Mining Institute. It's a stunning 19th century building, fronted by 12 white columns and overlooking the Neva River. Founded by Catherine the Great in 1773, the institute is no less impressive inside, with pale green halls lit by chandeliers and lined with paintings of academicians. The institute houses a museum containing a world-class collection of gems and has its own Orthodox church. The staff and students wear uniforms, and the university has a hymn, although it's clear that this was composed some time after the reign of Catherine the Great. Inside the institute, I meet Nikolai Vasiliev, an avuncular, reassuring man with an abundance of energy and a strikingly modest manner. He leads me through clusters of students, in their uniforms their miniature younger versions of himself, to a small office piled with papers. In Russian life, there's no escaping the pressure of paperwork, post-meeting reports, accounts, lists, official documents, all with the necessary stamps and signatures. But what I want to find out about is the actual drilling at Vostok Station. Why exactly is it difficult to drill through nearly 3 miles of ice? A gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth, Vasiliev takes off his jacket, leans over his mountains of papers, and starts to explain.
I should say that ice drilling is quite a special area. It's quite different from drilling on land for solid minerals, oil or gas. We use completely different equipment developed specially for such conditions as Antarctic, Greenland or the glaciers of the North Arctic Sea. Some of the glaciers there are more than 1,000 meters thick. In Greenland, the glacier is over 3,000 meters. It's about 3,200 meters, maybe slightly more. But in the Antarctic, the ice is up to 4 kilometers thick. And because the Antarctic is so far removed from other continents, there's no infrastructure of any kind, no roads. It's very difficult to use standard equipment. Using oil and gas drilling equipment for the drilling of a 4,000-meter borehole wouldn't work. This kind of equipment weighs hundreds of tons, while its power capacity is more than 1,000 kilowatts. Naturally, it's impossible to set up this kind of drilling in the Antarctic.
Getting heavy equipment to the Vostok base is impossible because there are no roads and no transport. Even delivering enough fuel to the station in order to generate the energy required to power up the equipment is tricky. This means that the Russian researchers have to design their own equipment from scratch.
Instead of drilling pipes, they use freight-carrying cable, which is a cable with wires inside. This significantly lightens the equipment and reduces the loss of energy when transmitting it from the surface to the drill. Standard drilling equipment weighs hundreds of tons. We had to design equipment that weighed just 30 to 35 tons, but that could drill as deep as a big oil and gas machine and consume not thousands of kilowatts, but no more than 40 kilowatts. Otherwise, if the machine was heavier, we wouldn't be able to transport it around the Antarctic. That's all.
Professor Vasiliev is eager to acknowledge that drilling experts in other countries have also gone deep. American scientists have drilled as far as 3,400 meters, whereas the Russians penetrated Lake Vostok at over 3,700 meters. But there's one big difference. At about 3,000 meters, drilling effectively stops. As Vasiliev explained, scientists all over the world have faced this problem, and it's because the structure of the ice changes after this point. So in recent years, he and his colleagues have been trying to develop equipment that would penetrate beyond 3,000 meters.
It showed when we were drilling in our borehole, 5G for the second time, which we had to do after water got into the borehole and froze when we reached 3,523 meters, the point at which last time the drilling completely stopped. This time we didn't even feel any changes. The drilling was very smooth and stable, so here was the evidence that we'd found the optimal solution, but we had to spend a huge amount of time on it.
Nikolai Vasiliev first visited the Antarctic in 1978. Since the mid-1990s, except for one 8-year break, he's been there every year, staying for 2 months at a time, with another month spent on travelling to and from the base. So that's 3 months away each year, usually around December to February, during the Antarctic summer. Around 8 other men, drillers and glaciologists, make this trip annually, with others staying at Vostok all year round to maintain the base. This is what's called wintering. Right now, Professor Vasiliev is busy preparing for his next trip. His aims this season are clear.
We must drill to the maximum, and if it works, and if we have enough time, we would like to reach the lake once again and do everything we need in order to bring up the water. Because in the future, when we'll be researching it, we'll have to do this operation a number of times. We'll need a number of seasons in order to conduct all the research we need. For this, we'll need to access the lake several times because the water that we bring up through the borehole will freeze if we leave it for a long time, especially in winter. So each time we will have to access the lake anew and make sure that we calculate all the levels in advance.
That's the technical plan. But the key to smooth operations at Vostok, according to Vasiliev, is in the people. Forget an essential piece of equipment and you're stuck. No trips to the DIY shop here. It's far trickier, however, to choose a band of men who can live and work together in close quarters in relative peace. I asked Professor Vasiliev what qualities he looks for in new members of his team.
First of all, of course, they have to be interested in this work, because if there's no interest, nothing good will come of it. Additionally, a person should have the relevant knowledge and professional skills. And it's not just knowledge, it's also the ability to work with your hands. The conditions there are very difficult and require a lot of manual labour. Often we have to dig out buildings from under the snow. In order to prepare water, we have to cut the snow into little cubes and make sure that everyone in the team gets it. There's no plumbing, so we have to melt the snow. A person must be fully aware of these conditions, and if he gets there, he can't moan and complain that conditions are not good enough for work. He must also understand from the beginning where he's going, and we try not to take people who don't understand this. When we plan our team, we look for people who get on easily with each other, because this place on the planet is very isolated and it's a very small social group. A person needs to be a good listener and avoid conflict, even if it's brewing.
And the most peaceable man can't always be angelic. As Vasiliev says, anyone can be provoked and boil over a bit. To try to prevent problems, he makes sure the men working under him know exactly what their duties are and why they're there. He says that if you explain these things clearly, then the men will dedicate themselves fully. Dedication is not something Vasiliev is short of. Now 64, he thought he'd stop travelling to Antarctica at 50 because it would become tougher physically. But following an accident at the station in 2007, when the drill became stuck in the ice, Vasiliev found himself working at Vostok for a lot longer. It's taken him and his colleagues 5 years to get the drilling program back on track. He sometimes notices his age.
This is the most unpleasant thing, for me personally anyway, because I don't just like managing people. I like working with my hands, and when you feel that things don't come easy like they used to, it's not good.
But Vasiliev doesn't sound as if he regrets having to keep returning to Vostok. Many who work at Vostok, called polyarniki or polar men in Russian, can't wait to return. The white magnet of Antarctica, as it gets called, draws them back. Before the collapse of the Soviet Union, travel abroad was an attraction. In the old days, the Russians would sail for a month in order to reach Antarctica, stopping at different countries on the way. But what about now, when Russians can travel more freely abroad and the journey to Antarctica is speeded up thanks to aeroplanes? Well, the escape from city life, the focus on a single mission without distractions, and the isolation are all appealing. But the main thing, says Vasiliev, is the chance to concentrate on scientific and engineering work that is at once confounding, arduous and thrilling. Perhaps that's why some of the Vostok scientists say that this is where real life begins. The long periods away from home can put pressure on home lives. Half the marriages of these polar men break up, says Vasiliev. As the father of 2 children, now grown up, he's missed quite a few birthdays and special days. Vasiliev always celebrates his own birthday, which falls in December at the Vostok station. And the whole team has long forgotten about traditional Russian New Year, staying at home in warm high-rise apartments, cosily surrounded by wives and children, by traditional Olivier salad with lashings of mayonnaise, meat in aspic, clementines, cold vodka, and the television blaring in the background. Instead, they sit round a table in Spartan 1970s accommodation, a strapping gang of men lifting glasses of Russian champagne, perhaps a shot of cognac, no getting away from your roommate, no going out, anywhere. But not everything is rough and ready. There's occasionally room for something else at the Vostok station, besides the unromantic and physically exhausting, albeit fascinating, work. Tradition at the base dictates that these polar men drink every 3rd toast, not to scientific discovery, or to national pride, or even to Antarctica itself, but to love. I'm Alice Lagnado, and I've been reporting on the Russian mission to Antarctica from St Petersburg. This is the Voice of Russia. Stay with us. Thanks for joining me in this roundup of feature stories from 2013 from the Voice of Russia in London.